A quiet village in southern Italy, 1943. The smells of rosemary and dust. Women gather in kitchens kneading dough, their hands worn from years of work. Children play in narrow streets, their laughter echoing of stone walls. The war has arrived, yes, but it feels distant, something happening too. Soldiers on faraway fields, they do not yet understand the worst is not the bombs, not the bullets, not the hunger or the burning villages. It is something far more personal, something that will haunt families for generations. In the hills above the town, the older women look toward the horizon. They sense it before they see it, a low rumble, dust rising in the distance at dawn. The trucks arrive and nothing will ever be the same. Allied and Axis forces tear across Italian soil like a storm. Villages become battlegrounds, cities crumble under fire. The Italian people caught between two warring sides try to survive. But another war is happening in the shadows. Women become targets, not soldiers, not combatants, just women. The breakdown begins slowly. First, the soldiers arrive, foreign men speaking foreign languages. Then, the chaos, law and order collapse in rural towns. There are no police, no protections, only fear. Reports begin to filter through, whispered. At first, a woman attacked near the river, a family dragged from their home in the night. Then more and more the occupying forces, some allied. Some Axis move through the countryside. Like wolves, the chaos of war has created a hunting ground. And the prey are the women left behind in one village. A young mother tries to hide her daughters in the cellar. She hears boots on the cobblestones, her heart hammers in her chest. She knows what is coming years later. When she is old and grey, she will finally whisper her story to a historian. Her voice will tremble, her hands will shake, but for now, she only prays. There is a word in Italy that still haunts the old villages, Moroccanate. It refers to the mass assaults committed by colonial troops during the Italian campaign. Thousands of women, girls, even the elderly, targeted, violated, destroyed. Between 1943 and 1944, the French expeditionary corps advanced through southern Italy. Among them were the Moroccan Goumiers, colonial soldiers recruited from North Africa, fierce fighters, brutal, and they had been promised something dark: freedom to loot, freedom to take what they wanted. And what they wanted was the women. Entire villages were invaded at night. Soldiers moved door to door. Families were dragged into the streets. Men who tried to protect their wives, daughters, sisters were shot, stabbed, tortured. In the village of Esperia, over 700 women were assaulted in a single night. 700. The survivors speak of screams that echoed through the valley, of mothers clutching their children, of old women who thought they were too old to be touched, but they were wrong. A 7-year-old girl, an 85-year-old grandmother. No one was spared. One survivor years later would recall how she prayed for death, how she stopped feeling anything at all, how the soldiers laughed as they left her bleeding in the dirt. And the most haunting part, some officers knew, some commanders turned a blind eye because it was easier, because it kept the troops motivated, because women in war are expendable. So the question lingers, why was this encouraged? When the war ended, the survivors thought they could finally speak. They were wrong. The Catholic Church, deeply embedded in Italian life, pressured families into silence. Shame was easier than justice. Victims were told to move on, to forgive, to forget. The Italian government, desperate to rebuild and maintain alliances with the victorious powers, feared damaging relations with France and the Allies, so the testimonies were buried, swept under the rug of history. Women who spoke out were shamed, called liars, accused of trying to ruin the honor of their communities. The psychological destruction that followed was catastrophic. Many survivors never married, never had families, some never spoke again. In one town, a young woman tried to tell her story to the local priest. He told her to pray for forgiveness for what she had done. Nothing wrong, yet she carried the guilt like a stone tied around her neck. The trauma passed down. Children grew up in houses thick with silence, mothers who flinched at the sound of footsteps, fathers who drank to forget what they had failed to stop, and the world moved on. How many stories will last forever? Decades passed, the survivors grew old, many died taking their secrets to the grave, but a few finally spoke. In the 1990s, historians began uncovering documents, letters, diaries, military reports that confirmed the horror. Survivor testimonies emerged. Women like Maria Maddalena Rossi, who who had been silent for 50 years finally told her story. Her voice cracked as she spoke, but she spoke. The village of Isperia, once a name on a map, became synonymous with suffering. Over 700 women assaulted in one night, entire families destroyed. The case of the 7-year-old girl, the 85-year-old woman, both victims, both forgotten for decades. Researchers dug deeper. They found evidence that Allied command had been informed, that officers had known, that orders to stop the violence were ignored. One report buried in a French military archive detailed complaints from Italian mayors begging for protection. The response was silence. Another document revealed that some French officers privately acknowledged the assaults, but did nothing because it would damage morale. Justice was never served. Not a single soldier was prosecuted. Not a single commander held accountable. The survivors watched the world honor the liberators' parades, medals, monuments, and they wondered, who will remember us? The scars lasted lifetimes. Many women never married, never had families. The trauma was too deep. Trust, once shattered, could never be rebuilt. Some took their own lives. The shame, the silence, the weight of it all, too much to bear. In one village, 3 women hanged themselves within a year of the war, ending. The priest refused to bury them in consecrated ground. Even the children suffered. Those born from the assaults carried a stigma whispered about, excluded. Some were given up, some were raised in homes filled with quiet resentment. Entire communities were traumatized, the social fabric torn apart. Men who had been unable to protect their families carried guilt that turned to rage. Women who survived lived in constant fear. And Italy as a nation struggled to acknowledge this history for decades. It was easier to focus on the heroism of resistance fighters, the bravery of soldiers, the sacrifices made. But what about the women? Recognition came slowly. Too slowly. By the time the Italian government finally acknowledged the Moroccanate, many survivors had already died. Why did it take so long for the world to listen? In 2000, for 60 years after the horror, the Italian government officially acknowledged the Moroccanate. Memorials were built, survivors were honored, politicians gave speeches, but many of the women were already gone. They had died waiting for someone to believe them, waiting for justice that never came. Still, the recognition mattered. It meant their suffering was real. It meant history would not erase them. Films and books began to tell their story. In 1960, director Vittorio De Sica released 2 women based on the experiences of survivors. Sophia Loren played a mother trying to protect her daughter from the violence of war. She won an Oscar. The world watched, and for a moment people remembered. But memory is fragile. Society moves on quickly today. Italy is still grappling with this dark chapter. Schools teach about the war, but often skip over the Moroccanate. Tourists visit the beautiful villages, unaware of what happened there. The survivors who remain are very old now. Their voices are fading. But their stories must not, because this is not just history, it is a warning. This story is not just about the past. It is a warning about what happens when armies are given permission to terrorize, when women are treated as spoils of war, when the world looks away because justice is inconvenient. The pattern repeats. Bosnia and Syria, Ukraine. In every conflict, women are targeted. In every war, their suffering is minimized, forgotten, or denied. The survivors of the Moroccanate lived in silence because the world was not ready to hear them, because their pain was less important than political alliances, because women, even in the 20th century, were still seen as expendable. But some of them found the courage to speak decades later. When their hands trembled and their voices cracked, they told the truth, and we have a responsibility to listen, to remember, to teach. Because silence is a choice, and every time we choose silence we allow it to happen again. The cost of forgetting is measured in the lives of women who deserved better. The cost of silence is everything.